Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome. Before I will talk about this evening, very exclusive, very special event you. Let me briefly tell you what's happening. Two important programs which I do not want you to miss it, not to be missed even. That is on the 12th, Wednesday, we have Zerodha No Impediments, a journey into the fabulous success of India's foremost fintech company. We have Nitin Kamath, who is the founder and CEO of Zerodha, will be talking to us that evening. He'll be in conversation with Mr. Shankar, founder of CAMS and also director of ACOS Investment Limited. Then on the 26th, I'm only talking about important program. There are a number of other programs. You can watch the website. The Art of Happy Exit, how successful entrepreneurs sell their businesses. We have an outstanding international speaker, Mr. Sri Krishna, entrepreneur, professor from Northeastern University, USA. And he'll be in conversation with Chandu Nair, again, entrepreneur advisor. We have another entrepreneur of par excellence, Charu Ramanathan. She is a co-founder and CEO of Vital Exchange. She's from Washington. This event, what's happening. There are all our events for the month of June and July also have been finalized. It's on the website. You can watch them. And before that, I want to tell about another important initiative which you have taken to bring, that is MMA mentorship program for women entrepreneurs. This is again the advice of Mr. Balraman. We are doing this and we are trying it out. We really wanted to empower women entrepreneurs, women professionals. We got 3 steps, simple steps, what you follow. That's number 1, to get on the MMA website. Number 2, interact, mentor program, local chapter, student chapter. Then the number 3 is request for a mentor. The moment you request for a mentor, the next screen will come to you where you have to do that. The next screen, be a mentor or find a mentor. Click onto this, it will give you all the details. If you want to be a mentor, please do so. And we have a outstanding committee which will evaluate each other thing, and based on the need, we'll recommend who should be the mentor. I thought this is a small step in the right direction. We'll be doing it initially for the women entrepreneurs and women professionals. Thereon, we're already doing with the management students, professionals. We want to really do a full-fledged mentoring and counseling program for our members and professionals and entrepreneurs. Thank you for your patience. Do log in and make the best use of what is available to you. Like coming to today's event, as I really mentioned to you just a while ago, strategic patience, how India can rise to China's challenge. Today, most of the corporates, be it professionals or otherwise, when they get up in the morning, if they don't read about China, I don't think the day is made. If they don't read anything about the newspaper in China, they think something wrong with the newspaper. And that's why one of the reasons when we were told by Mr. Ganesh Natarajan that they want to do a collaborative program along with Center for China Studies, Chennai, strategic patience and how India can rise to the China challenge. And let me have the privilege of introducing the distinguished panelists for this evening and special invitees. And Mr. Ganesh Natarajan, during introductory remarks, he'll tell you what really made them to discuss and what made them write this piece of paper by Pune International Center. We have very distinguished panelists. Dr. Ganesh Natarajan will be in conversation with Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, Dr. Ajit Keshav Ranade, and Professor Ajay Shah. Let me have the privilege of introducing the distinguished panelists for this evening. May I have the slides, please? Mr. Ganesh. Yes, Mr. Ganesh Natarajan is the chairman of Fire World. All these detailed profiles have already been shared with you, and let me briefly tell you what he is. Also founder of Global Talent Track and Skills. And Ganesh is also a master from Industrial Engineering from NITI Mumbai, PhD from IIT Mumbai, and he has recently been elected as a shareholder by the State Bank of India and to serve on the board of directors of SBI. And Ganesh is as a chairman industry of associations like NASCOM and various national committees, conferences, and he's also been author of 8 books and numerous articles. It's indeed a privilege to have Dr. Ganesh Natarajan will be leading the conversation today. Let me have the privilege of introducing the next distinguished speaker panel for this evening. Ambassador Gautam Bambawale is a former Indian ambassador to China. He was also an Indian Foreign Service for 34 years of service, and he has been Indian ambassador to Bhutan, Pakistan, and China. I don't think nobody can be a better countries to talk about today, and his insights will be a great value to us. And he has done his MPhil in economics from Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics from Pune, and he has over 17 years of experience in dealing with China. So there could be nobody better than Ambassador to talk to us this evening about China and its impact. Very warm welcome to you, Ambassador. Let me have the privilege of introducing next distinguished panelists for this evening. Ajit Keshav Ranade is not due to MMA. We have seen him a couple of events in MMA, and he is served as the executive director earlier Financial Technologies India Limited and chief economist at ABN AMRO. His professional career has spanned academic, corporate assignments, and much more. He was also independent director of multiple companies. He has served on the various committees of Reserve Bank of India, most recently in the Committee of Fuller Capital Accountability Convertibility, and a member of the board of India Today Economists, and also chairman of the CIA West Zone. And he is a member of the Senate of the Advisory Council of Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai. Very warm welcome to you, Mr. Ranade. It's a pleasure to have you with us again. He is President and Chief Economist of Aditya Birla Group. Let me have the privilege of introducing, welcoming Professor Dr. Ajay Shah, Research Professor of Business at Jindal Global University. And he has also held a number of important positions, including Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, CMIE, and Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Studies, and National Institute of Public and Finance Policy. And he does academic and policy-oriented research on India. And his area of focus are many, including health, technology, and policy. It's indeed a privilege to welcome you, Professor Dr. Ajit Shah. Indeed, pleasure to have you with. In addition to distinguished panelists for this evening, we also have some special invitees. We want to make it interesting. After the panelists have their own interaction, sharing their views and insights, we have four outstanding people who are experts in the field of China will be joining us. They don't need introduction because you all met them, interacted with them in a number of occasions in MMA platform. One is Mr. V. Balraman, past president of MMA, MD of Pons India, and mentor and great supporter of MMA and his activities. Venki Nagan also worked over 10 years in Hong Kong and mainland China. You also heard him talking about China a couple of weeks back in MMA. Very warm welcome to Venki, warm welcome to Mr. Balraman. Then also we have with Ravi Purushottaman, President of Madras Management Industry, will be joining us. He's President of Danfoss. He will share with us an international perspective because he is having his plans all over the world. His input will be a great insight for us. Then we have Commodore Vasan, who is one of the partners for this event. Commodore Vasan is at the moment the president of the Center for China Studies, and is also alumni of Defense Service Staff College, IVLP USA, and is also director of C3S, and is a speaker at International Forum. And again, we consider him as an authority on China Studies Act. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to have a wonderful session this evening. As usual, if you have any questions, please do send your questions. You are watching in the Zoom in the chat box, and the distinguished panelists, if you have by name, you can address the question by name. Otherwise, general, we pick up and appropriately pass it on to the appropriate speaker to respond accordingly. All those who are watching this program live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and radio, as usual, share your question by WhatsApp number, what is flashing on your screen. Our team will collate and present it to the distinguished panelists this evening to respond to your question. Thank you so much once again, gentlemen, for joining this evening. I will now request Mr. Ganesh Natarajan to take over and lead the session for this evening. Over to you, Mr. Ganesh Natarajan.
Thank you very much, sir, and a very good evening to all of you. I mean, for me, it's always a privilege to speak at either AIMA or Madras Management Association, and I had some very pleasant experiences in the past with a very intelligent, very articulate, very interactive audience. So we look forward to the same thing this evening. Just as a background, I think China has always been a subject of personal like for me, for the simple reason that I was running this company called Aptech, and we built this extremely successful joint venture with Beijing University in China, and really enjoyed building a market leadership position there. And then, of course, when I was running Zensar, we again set up multiple ventures in China, not only in Shanghai, but also in smaller places like Zhuhai, etc. So, I mean, I probably traveled more cities in China than I would care to remember. And of course, today we are not talking about China at its best. We're probably talking about China at an aggressive level, and we'll come back to that. So just a little introduction to PIC. I think most of you know the India International Center. But Pune International Center was set up a few years ago. In fact, Ambassador Bambawale and I are both trustees of the center. And the president is Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar, who is one of India's most celebrated scientists and scientific administrators. And the vice president is Dr. Vijay Kelkar. Again, his government pedigree needs no description. And under their leadership, I think they've done many interesting things. In fact, Gautam himself runs something called the Asia Economic Dialogue that we do every year. And that has been very successful because it's been in partnership with the Ministry of External Affairs. And we've had outstanding speakers from around the country, around Asia, even beyond Asia, who come and speak there. So that's been very successful. So this thing happened, and let me give you a bit of history and then plunge into the paper. This happened, of course, 9 months back. As all of us know, the conflict erupted in Doklam and then Ladakh. And I think the immediate response that we all see, I mean, we are all obviously patriotic people, and we were all worried about the sudden, unprovoked aggression from China. And of course, the first response, which we did magnificently, was to mobilize our troops and give a very fitting defense response. But economic responses also followed. As you know, the Chinese apps were banned almost immediately. Then there was an emotional boycott of Chinese goods, almost as though we said that, look, we will do everything without China. How dare they do it, etc., etc. So when some of us got together, and when I say some of us, it was really Dr. Mashilkar and Dr. Kelkar, whose idea it was. And of course, they tapped Ambassador Bambawale, myself, Ajit Ranade, who of course is one of our most well-known economists, and Professor Ajay Shah. And in fact, there is a very well-written book by Professor Shah with Dr. Kelkar, which many of you should read. And so the six of us got together. We had a series of discussions. In fact, it turned out to be almost like a weekly Zoom chat that we used to have. And we decided that what was called for is not knee-jerk reactions, it was a strategic response. Because the problems had to be seen from an understanding of China. We had to see it on a larger scale in terms of space, time, and force. We also decided that as patriotic Indian thinkers, we need to address deeper questions. What are the questions? Primarily motivation. What are the forces that shape Chinese behavior? What is the best path for India in the short term and the long term? And can we weave together a diplomatic and an economic policy response to best further India's interests? And why are we doing this? Because the reality is, as all of us know, and we are all mature human beings here, that whether we look at GDP numbers, state capacity, capabilities of the top firms, the extent of internationalization, the mastery of science, technology, their leadership in artificial intelligence, research, let's face it, China is significantly ahead of India and has indeed gone that far in maybe the last 50, 60 years. I mean, in the 60s, we were very much at par, but they've gone ahead. So if you look at it, in 1962, I think roughly the same levels of GDP, then rose to 305 billion USD in 1980 that we did, and China grew to 14 trillion in the same period. And I think what we are now seeing in 2019, and if you look at 2019 against China's near 14 trillion, we, as you know, are just touching 2.9 trillion. So there is a huge gap that has opened. However, if you do the math, and I know math is easier to do than reality, but China has its own set of problems, and we'll talk to those. I mean, there is an international outcry because of COVID and everything else. There is a worry about the supply chains being largely concentrated in China, and obviously America, Europe are all concerned about that. There is also a lot of worries about the One Belt, One Road and various other initiatives that China is taking up. And there is an opportunity for India to be literally a good and a democratic alternative. We'll talk about it. And just to conclude with one number, and then I'll hand it over to my panelists. If India grows at 8% in the next 20 years, while China's growth comes down to maybe 4.5%, potentially India can go to 40 trillion by 2041, while China will grow to 53 trillion. And if you extend beyond to 2047, we can actually come to near par. That is the opportunity. That is the challenge. And I think that's really what we've been very excited about. So the way we'll structure this discussion is I will request Ambassador Bambawale, because Gautam knows China more intimately than many of us and has been very passionately following the developments. I'll ask him to kind of lay out the scenario, what happened and what he thinks is the response. We'll then request Dr. Ranade to really come up with his ideas on what can be economic responses. I will talk about 8 or 9 industry sectors that we have researched, which many of you would be interested in, and what we feel are the possibilities for India versus China. And finally, I'll request Dr. Prof. Ajay Shah to really give his thoughts on how to make this happen. So each one of us will maybe speak for between 8 to 10 minutes. So we'll just take about 40 minutes at most. And we'll have adequate time, ladies and gentlemen, for your questions. So please feel free, as you just heard, to post it on chat, or maybe we can look at an interactive session as we go. So again, thank you very much. And over to you, Gautam.
Thank you very much, Ganesh. And first of all, let me thank Madras Management Association, the Chennai Center for China Studies, which of course I have known for many, many decades now. And of course, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for coming together for this session. Great pleasure to be with all of you. Let me dive straight into the topic which has been laid out by Dr. Natarajan already. So we all know now that in roughly end April, early May of 2020, the Chinese moved huge numbers of troops to our borders in northern India, which is in eastern Ladakh. And like all of you, we all know that India was then battling with the early onset of the early days of the COVID crisis. And like all of you, whether in Madras or in Bangalore or in any other part of India, Delhi, Pune, Mumbai, all of us started asking ourselves the question that why is it that the Chinese are doing this at this point in time? And when we discussed about the reasons as to why China was uh, trying to undertake military coercion on India's borders, that China had undertaken military aggression in eastern Ladakh, we realized that there was one very fundamental necessary condition which had been met and due to which the Chinese were able to be so aggressive. And that necessary condition was what Dr. Natarajan has already introduced to you and already explained to you, the huge asymmetry, the huge gap in economic, military, and in fact, in comprehensive national power between India and China. In 1980, China, if you just take GDP as a good measure of national power, China was a 305 billion US dollar economy. At the same time, India was roughly a $189 billion economy. But by 2019, as Dr. Natarajan has already pointed out, China was already a $14 trillion economy, maybe a $14.5 trillion economy. And we were just short of $3 trillion. So there was a huge gap which had opened up between India and China, not only in economic power, but also military power, scientific power, technological power, and comprehensive national power. So this was a necessary condition for China to be able to undertake the kind of military coercion and military aggression that she did on our borders in May of 2020, and which continues even today, despite the fact that there has been disengagement in one sector. There are many other sectors in which the close confrontation, the close troop mobilization between the two sides continues. And therefore, we realize that this kind of military confrontation which was taking place in Eastern Ladakh was not merely a military affair. It was also an economic affair. It was also a technological affair. It was also a scientific affair. It was also an innovation affair. It was something which was essential. The gap, the asymmetry between India and China was an essential factor which went into China becoming aggressive on our border in Eastern Ladakh. Now, when we analyzed about what India could do to rise to this Chinese challenge, the immediate factor, of course, is to move our military might. But this can only be something which can be done in a very short term. In the longer term, we need to think about how India can rise to this challenge, and that is what our paper is all about. I'm going to talk about one aspect of the paper, which is in the short term, it will be absolutely essential if India has to see off the China challenge, if India has to protect its territorial integrity, because of this huge asymmetry between the two countries, it is absolutely essential for India to build balancing coalitions with some other countries in the world. And what we have advocated in our paper is that there are three groups of countries with which we should consider building such balancing coalitions. The first group, of course, are the major democracies of the world. So countries like the United States, like Japan, like Australia, and that forms the Quad. And the Quad, as we know, has gone very quickly in the last 6 months from a meeting of foreign ministers in person, physically in Tokyo in early October 2020. And in March of 2021, we have already had a virtual summit meeting of the leaders of the four Quad countries. But there are other countries too with which India could consider building balancing coalitions, major democracies of the world. The UK is one example, and we have just had a major summit, virtual summit meeting between the prime ministers of India and the UK. France is yet another example. South Korea is a possibility, and so on and so forth. There's a second group of countries with which we believe India should build such balancing coalitions or should attempt to build such balancing coalitions. And this group of countries is those which are in China's frontiers, which are on the borders of China. An example, Russia. We have a fantastic relationship with Russia. We need to build a deep partnership with Russia. Another example is Vietnam. So here's a second group of countries with which we can possibly build balancing coalitions. And there's a third group of countries which we recommend, which is in India's neighborhood, countries such as Bangladesh, countries such as Sri Lanka, with which we already have very close political and economic ties. Now, in all of this, it may be necessary for India to go beyond just government to government interaction. There has to be interaction and exchanges between institutions of the two countries, between the people of the two countries, between businessmen of the two countries. There has to be trade and investment between these countries and India. And therefore, we need to build deep partnerships with some of these countries. And we believe that there's a group of about 20, 22 countries with which India could think of building such a balancing coalition or balancing coalitions. Now, in all of this, Indian diplomacy will come up with something new. And that something new is that it may be essential for India to undertake domestic changes, perhaps domestic economic changes, which will help in building these deep partnerships with these countries. And this is something which we have never done in the past, and where India's diplomacy will need to rise to the kind of challenge that is in front of us because of this huge power which is on our border, namely China. There's one other thing which I'd like to mention, and then I'll stop there and let my co-authors to talk about their points of view on various other things. But, Dr. Natarajan spoke about this knee-jerk reaction that we need to stop doing business with China. We do not advocate that at all. In fact, we do not believe that it is necessary or even possible for a complete decoupling of the Indian economy and the Chinese economy, given the nature of globalization and the close connections between our two economies. But in the short term, we do believe that there are three areas in which India can retreat from economic engagement with China. And these three areas are as follows. One, we should not permit Chinese government-controlled companies to obtain a controlling stake in certain key Indian infrastructure projects, whether they're ports or whether they're in our frontier areas, etc., etc. Second, we must avoid Chinese technological standards and work with global standards. And just 2 days ago, the Department of Telecom in India has spoken about 5G trials where Chinese companies like Huawei have been kept out. This is what we have been advocating, and we are delighted that the government of India has moved in this direction. And the third area in which we can retreat from economic engagement with China in the short run is to ensure that Chinese surveillance of Indian persons is blocked. It does not happen. And that is one area which is of great concern to us. So with those words, Ganesh, I'm going to stop and leave the floor back to you and to our other co-authors. Thank you so much for your attention.
Sure. Thank you very much, Gautam. And as I think, as all of you would have realized, that there is a huge charter out there, and we really need to slice it and dice it and see how do we take this forward. So for that, I'm going to request Dr. Ranade. Ajit.
Thank you, Ganesh. And good evening, everybody. It's always great to be back at MMA. I wish everybody good health and safety from the pandemic, and that we recover and come out of it very soon. And again, congratulations on the new government, and I hope good days ahead. I'm going to make a few observations, and hopefully we'll have enough time for a Q&A, because that's where I think most of the more productive and meaty discussion can happen. But I urge you to read the paper, which is an executive summary. It's a 30-page paper. The link has been posted in the chat. If you scroll up, the link, Dr. Ajay Shah and somebody else also has posted. I would strongly urge those of you who have not seen the paper, please do read it. It will take some time, maybe half an hour, but it captures all the ideas. So I want to begin by saying, just 4 days ago, we had an emergency airlifting of 12 cryogenic tanks of liquid oxygen from Tianjin in China to Kolkata. And then they were taken 280 kilometers to Jamshedpur, emergency help for the hospital. If we were not, if the context of this discussion today was not there, these are the kind of linkages with China we would have seen flourishing. China has, of course, said that it is ready to send more emergency supplies, medicines, PPEs, not just cryogenic tanks, and more cryogenic tanks may be coming from China to India. Secondly, this year, 2020, that is the year that just got over, India's #1 trading partner was China. Despite the events of Ladakh and what has happened before, it was ahead of UAE, it was ahead of USA, it was ahead of EU, it was ahead of ASEAN. India's #1 trading partner continues to be China. Number 3, 18% of all imports of India, even today, come from China. Now you remember, one of our major imports is crude oil, and not a drop of crude oil comes from China to India. So if you take away crude oil, China's contribution to India's imports, merchandise imports, is probably 40 or 50%, continues to be. And the fourth thing I'd like to mention by way of preamble is that if you look at the trade relationship between India and China in the last 3 years, it has been moving in a direction which is satisfactory to us. That is, India's exports to China have been increasing. They are now at $16 billion. China's imports to India have been decreasing. They are about 48 or 50, less than $50 billion now. And the trade deficit has been narrowing. This is a 3-year trend. So another interesting tidbit, back in the year 2000 or 2001, China has been a fantastic export-led growth story for the last 30 years, more than 30, 35 years. It is an export juggernaut. So India is also one of its destination countries. But back in 2001, India was destination number 19. So it was not very important in the list of priority countries where China had export interest. But in just 10 years or 10, 12 years, India became destination number 5 or 6, rapidly increasing. So India's consumer market is of great relevance to China. And in fact, as I said, India-China trade was growing very dynamically and vigorously. Of course, there was an asymmetry which was worrying to us because the trade deficit was increasingly in favor of China, and we were worried about it. But the last 3 years, we saw some early signs of reversal of that. So that is the background. But having said all this, what happened in Doklam, what happened in Ladakh last year and Doklam in 2017, in some ways there's been an irreversible change. And I'm afraid that status quo has been changed by the Chinese side, not by India. There was a time when it was possible to keep trade, commerce, and investment, commercial relationship between the two countries in a separate compartment, and geopolitical issues, border disputes, and other concerns in a separate compartment. Both could be pursued parallelly, simultaneously, and somewhat satisfactorily. The border issue is very old, probably more than 50 years old, and it's not as if there haven't been hostilities. There have been eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation, but it has never led to any casualties, any killing, any death of soldiers. So there was always a way to de-escalate or diffuse the situation from the ground through maybe phone calls between army and armed forces commanders or political or government to government. But something has changed, and I'm afraid the responsibility lies with China. That is the background motivation for this paper, that the title is Strategic Patience and Flexibility. that we have to acknowledge that in all dimensions, economic, scientific, military, human quality of life indices, China is far ahead. The economy is 5 times bigger. And our economic dependency, I told you, our import dependency is substantial. And if I break it down into subsectors, in pharmaceutical intermediates, which are required for India's success as a global exporter of generic drugs or bulk drugs, 69% of APIs come from China. Even penicillin, which we used to make in India, no longer is. We can't even feed our own domestic demand. We have to import it from China. What to speak of things like compressors and even automotive parts, even some so in chemicals, specialty chemicals. So dependence is quite high. So the idea is this: the idea of strategic patience is that we have to have a very conscious strategy, which will not work overnight, but we go to less China. We cannot become China less, but we go to less China. China is going to be is already the second largest economy in the world, and it's going to be probably in PPP terms the largest economy very soon. So we cannot be completely cut off or decoupled completely from this large market. We are also neighbors, of course, but we believe that we can go to a situation which is China, less of China, and that will involve most of the program that we will have to undertake is a domestic agenda. And that domestic agenda for many of you may be familiar, because that familiar agenda means we have to get our act together. We have to focus on having high and sustained inclusive economic growth for a long period of time. Our structural factors are still in our favor, whether it's demography or mega trends like urbanization, the vast, very large infrastructure deficit, the potential for human capital, the very, very rapid embrace of digital technologies, and of course, the spirit of entrepreneurship. All these are structural features of the Indian economy which are not going to go away. The pandemic is, I believe, just a setback. It's just an episodic setback. Unfortunately, we'll have lost 2 years. But if we focus on the domestic agenda, we will be able to narrow the gap somewhat, as Ganesh has given you a longer term prediction over 2 or 3 decades. But even the interim, we can consistently and gradually narrow the gap. That's the point of the paper. What do we need to do for that? There are several things. I think I would again urge you to read the paper, read that 30-page paper which we have put out. But it is things like improving the investment climate, improving our institutions of governance, improving what do investors want? Investors are not worried about burdensome regulations. If you go to China or South Korea, if you go to Germany or South Korea, the amount of regulations that industry or entrepreneurs or SMEs have to comply with are probably much more complex than India. But what these industries or investors want is predictability, continuity, and stability, which is basically rule of law, which is, I think, my colleague and friend, Dr. Ajay Shah will say much more about it. But basically, that's where we need to, the work is there. The work is on those fronts. And of course, there are sector-specific strategies, which Dr. Ganesh Natarajan will talk about, that there are areas where we can become much more self-reliant. We have a slogan now, Atmanirbhar, but that doesn't mean a closed economy that is not inward-looking import substitution. It just means Atmanirbhar with Atmavishwas, self-confidence, which means we have to raise the scale of domestic competitiveness to global scale, global standards of quality, and yet India as a base of global manufacturing hub. The world is looking at a China plus one strategy. Not just India, but others are looking to diversify because of geopolitical issues. The Biden administration looks like it's going to continue with the same stance that the Trump administration had vis-a-vis China. And as some people say, we are in the middle of a tech Cold War, a new Cold War, which is a tech Cold War. So we have to kind of take cognizance of those geopolitical realities and play along. Incidentally, I should also mention that very soon, in the next few months, India is hosting the 13th BRICS Summit, BRICS. It stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And what is the objective of this summit? It is cooperation for continuity, consolidation, and consensus. So we continue to that track with China. In fact, it's possible, if the pandemic allows, the president of China, Xi Jinping, he might very well be in India in a few months. So we'll be hosting him. But still, we need to understand this is the patience and strategic path we have to doggedly follow if you want to deal with the challenge of China. Before concluding, I'll just spend a minute that this paper is not really about China, meaning we could analyze, by the way, China looms large in India's mind, much more than India looms large on Chinese mind. We sit awake late at night thinking about China, but Chinese are not sitting late, awake worrying about India. They're worrying about the US. So that symmetry is there. However, our understanding of China is poor, I believe. Our scholarship on China is poor. Our language, support Chinese history, Chinese culture in Indian universities should be substantially upgraded. But let me also say that while this paper is not about China, let's recognize that China is not infallible. China has a lot of vulnerabilities which are developing, and we need to acknowledge that. We may not be able to exploit all of it, but we need to acknowledge and be aware of it. And therefore, we need an intense study of China. Number one, it's an aging society. In fact, the labor force has stopped growing, and population may very soon reach zero population growth and start declining. That has implications for the macroeconomy. It's a slowing down economy. They cannot sustain 6% growth, not even 6, forget about 8 or 10. And this is now formally acknowledged in the 14th five-year plan, which was just unveiled. There is now the jobs and economic growth is no longer the source of legitimacy for the government. It's a one-party state, and the government has legitimacy not through the electoral process or the ballot box, but because they generated jobs for hundreds of millions of people who went from rural areas to urban areas. That's not going to be possible anymore. So the struggle for legitimacy, how is the government going to earn credibility and legitimacy? That's a challenge. It's especially in the times of exploding social media. You've seen what happened in Hong Kong. They're struggling to cap that, which is completely led by the youth and by social media. Then they have friction with almost every neighbor: Philippines, Japan, South Korea, India. This is like at the same. They've picked up skirmish. Kind of frictions with so many people at the same time. That's going to add to their vulnerability. And finally, we also see a new phenomenon where the government of China seems to be very uncomfortable, if not actually adversarial, with the private sector. They abruptly pulling out of the IPO of Ant Financial, which is the part of the Alibaba group, doesn't bode well for private sector investors in China. Private sector is dynamically grown, but if this is what they're going to face, people will want to emigrate out. So all these factors we need to keep in mind, but the agenda is largely, I would say, domestic, and that's where we need to focus. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajit. That was really a very comprehensive roundup. And I was just looking at some of the comments that are coming in. And Gautam, I'd request you to look at a very interesting long comment from Mr. Kim Mong So from Mandalay, Myanmar, where he's actually pointed out some contradictions with what the ASEAN thinks of China. So as soon as Ajay and I finish, I think I'll certainly ask you to look at the question and answer it. It was a very interesting question. Okay, let me take up where Ajit left off. And I won't get into details of sectoral comparisons. If any of you are interested, Rupa Publishers is publishing a full book on our research. And 3 chapters of that is entirely devoted to sectoral comparisons and how we should view China. But very quickly, just to give you a flavor, and Dr. Ranade actually alluded to that we should look at the less China phenomenon from 3 lenses. One is the lens of, at least in areas where there is a huge monopoly of China, can we reduce dependence? The second, of course, is the Atmanirbhar, Atma Vishwas strategy, where there are some sectors which we have underperformed or underexploited, and what can we do to really accelerate that? And third is a few sectors, and I won't even name them here, where we can build a global growth story, where there's no reason why we should allow China to dominate, and the China +1 or the India strategy, if you will, can really make it happen. In terms of reducing dependence, the first one that comes to mind is rare earths. Many of you will remember that when President Biden first took over in the Oval Office, one of his first comments was that we have to reduce our rare earth dependence on China. And for the very simple reason that rare earths go into so many fundamental instruments and everything else, but the reality is there is a huge deposit of rare earths in China. So it's not easy when the raw material is in your country and you've kind of exploited that well to compete. But India has, there is Indian Rare Earths Limited, there are quite a few initiatives, so that can be done. We will never compete with China because we don't have that kind of core capability in terms of just the material level. So let's look at more positive situations. Telecom. If you look at telecom, where China has really invested. I mean, it was originally like in India, a monopoly of China Telecom, but they allowed multiple companies to come in and proliferate, and they've really dominated the space. But in India, I think there are glimmers of good signs because, first of all, the demand is going to substantially increase. Prime Minister Modi, in the Independence Day speech, again talked about the National Optic Fiber Network. As you know, it's been called NOFN, it's been called BharatNet, many other names, and really hasn't seen the last mile connectivity happen. Even today, while sitting in Chennai or wherever else in the cities, we may still enjoy reasonable bandwidth. India can really call itself a unified country only when the last village of the 640,000 villages enjoys 100 Mbps Wi-Fi. And that's far away if you don't install the National Optic Fiber Network. So moving from copper to optic fiber clearly is an opportunity to leapfrog, which we will do. A company like Reliance, for instance, I mean, love it or hate it, I think they've shown the way to how you can really build scale. I mean, just the Geo fundraising of 20 billion came in a year when the rest of the startup industry together could only muster up 15 billion. And that too at a valuation of 58 billion. So clearly gives hope that when you have a focused investment, whether it's in telecom or other sectors, we can clearly succeed. The third area, of course, is electronics. I mean, as all of us know, I come from the IT services industry. We're very proud that we built a $190 billion industry almost from nothing over a 4-decade period. But look at what we have left behind when that opportunity was being chased. We left behind the entire core ICT layer. Core ICT layer is information, communications, telecom, and designing the whole fabrication units for chips and microprocessors. I mean, today there are 13, 14 countries who are very dominant in that space. China, of course, took over from Taiwan, but Thailand, quite a few others, but we don't exist in that space. And while we are proud of the $190 billion IT services industry, believe me, if we did our investments rightly in that area, in the next 10 years, we could be a $200 billion in the ICT industry. So consumer electronics, hardware, fab or fabless semiconductors, all these are possibilities. And I think it's being exploited. I mean, and I'll come back to that right at the end on how the government is approaching it. If you look at the automotive sector, for instance, I mean, clearly the big opportunity of the future is not to set up more automotive plants. And Chennai and its suburbs are themselves, I think you're seeing a lot of that. But in what is called the ACES segment, which is the autonomous, connected, electric, shared vehicle, shared mobility kind of thing. Again, I in fact chair the Pune Center, the Center of Excellence on ACES for the Government of India. And they're seeing tremendous interest, not only from the Mahindras and the Tatas, but also from multiple entrepreneurs who have come in and really populated our COE. And we're very hopeful that that will happen. However, if you look at the bigger constraints, I mean, the whole charging ecosystem that America has now laid out thanks to Tesla, the whole lithium-ion battery problem, okay, which is obviously, again, a Chinese dominant area. And we need to look at alternatives like hydrogen. There's a lot of things to be done. But clearly an opportunity for India, not only to be Atmanirbhar, but be a significant provider to the world. If you go beyond that to agriculture, for instance, I mean, today I think all of us are engrossed with the farmer problem, etc., etc. But as Ajay will tell you, I mean, if you really peel the onion, you'll find that there is a logic in saying that we cannot be a rice and paddy economy forever because our godowns are overflowing, food is getting wasted, whereas the opportunity in organic farming, in fruit, in multiple areas, I think is something we need to look at. But there needs to be a very conscious policy on how do we not only create these kind of capabilities and surpluses and export possibilities in agriculture, but how do we take the country along? And that's a completely different discussion. Chemicals. I mean, if you look at China's dominance in chemicals, it's amazing. But if you look at what they did, the whole chemicals, special economic zones that they set up, they really made it extremely easy for any large chemical production facility to be done out of China. And that's not going to be easy because with the infrastructure, the logistics, everything in play for them. But it is clearly an opportunity and clearly a challenge for us to make that happen. Finally, if you look at one segment where we could arguably say over the last 1 year that we have demonstrated superiority over China, it's pharma. If you look at vaccines itself, I mean, the efficacy of a Covaxin is so much superior to a Sinovac or the other 3 or 4 vaccines being made in China that I think we can justifiably say that we have the ability to do it. But I think we need to again demonstrate that we can not just do it, but do it at scale. So to conclude, what has been the government's response so far? I think there has been a very good set of announcements in what is called the productivity linked incentive schemes. As you know, we are chasing champion companies both within India and abroad to come in and invest. Hopefully, I think all the other parameters that need to succeed, I mean, in terms of continuity of investment protection, everything, etc. The government has announced clearly what almost $30 billion of incentives. And Apple Computer, the giant, has been one of the first to say that, look, we'll come and do manufacturing in India. And I remember Dr. Ranade and I were having a discussion one late night, and he was saying what I think we should all believe, that look, it's not about the most sophisticated technology, the most capital intensive unit. Even if we can create assembly units all over the country, which create tens of millions of jobs, I think that would be fantastic. And today, as all of us know, in COVID and post-COVID, the Azim Premji University today was, the report was released yesterday. If 220 million Indians have gone into poverty, clearly we need to do a lot of semi-skill or low-skill jobs. And some of these areas can really help us to make it happen. So I am, as an industry person, I'm very excited about the opportunity. But as Dr. Ranade rightly said, there's a lot of concerted effort planning across ministries, between center and states, to take even these 9 sectors I briefly touched upon and maybe expand it beyond what we think is possible. Only then can we say that for the next 20 years, we will continue to grow at 8 to 9% per year, which is what, as we've all said, is the absolute essential. So I'll stop here and request Professor Ajay Shah to really make his remarks and really wrap the whole thing together. Ajay?
Yeah, thank you for having us here today. Above all, what we would love is for you to read the paper. Okay, so think of this as just an attempt by all of us. We are singing and dancing to get you excited to read the paper, but the real thought, the real knowledge is in the paper. Okay, what I want to start at what happened in Doklam and then in Ladakh. What happened was truly frightening, that we faced a military confrontation on our border, and it is an extremely uncomfortable place to be. And our first instinct was to mobilize troops and try to deal with the situation at the border. But we should not think that the game is about mobilizing troops in Ladakh. This is just the beginning. Why should we assume that the story ends here? Could there be more territorial conflict? What about the Indian Ocean? We have to think of the Chinese GDP and the resource possibilities for China. Could there be Chinese carrier groups that prowl the Indian Ocean? How would the Chinese state be able to interact with our neighbors, with a country like Bangladesh, with a country like Sri Lanka, and make them more hostile towards us? We've got to think about these things. We've got to think strategically. We've got to play at high levels of force, of space, of time, not just a day-to-day knee-jerk reaction, and not just solving the immediate point of pain. That's the essence of what we have tried to do in this paper. And you may or may not agree with the substantive content of this paper, and you may disagree with the conclusions that we have reached. But our plea to all of us as Indians, as Indian patriots, is that this thinking is really very important. This is what we need in India today. Just being more bellicose does not make the answer better. Just trumpeting nationalism does not make the answer better. Having high intentions does not make the answer better. What is of essence is getting things done. What we need is to be cold, to be rational, to be based on evidence, to be based on knowledge. We need to think, we need to devise strategy, we need to play on high amounts of force, high amounts of space, high amounts of time. We need the ability to debate within our country what our strategy should be. And then we need to be able to stay on subject. We need to be able to stay on a strategy for 25 years. That is the challenge that we as a people face. And as we point out in the paper, this is a challenge that we have never faced before. We as a country have never faced this challenge before. In the past, we faced a conflict with China in 1962, at a time when the Chinese GDP was roughly of the same order of magnitude as India. Today, China is 5 times bigger than India. In the past, we've had conflicts with Pakistan, but the Indian GDP has always been 5 times bigger than Pakistan. So fundamentally, it's not difficult to deal with a smaller country. And for the rest, we've got problems with irregulars, whether they are Naxalites or in Nagaland or in Kashmir. This is the first time in Indian history that we're facing a large-scale confrontation with a country that is 5x bigger and better than us at most things that we do. This is difficult. This is rough. And what all of us have to do is to reach deep into our hearts and our brains and be cold and be rational and think this through and have the courage of our convictions to build a strategy that honestly responds to the problems that we face. And then we've got to find the hunger and the energy to be able to stay on strategy for 25 years. Anything less than that will not work. We'll just get into one messy situation after another. And each time there's a messy situation, there will be the whole screaming on social media and there'll be 50,000 troops. But the boat is leaking and we will just be bailing. We've got to go deeper. We've got to solve the problems at the root cause. And my co-authors have already given you the essence of our thinking on this. There's a short-term story, there's a long-term story. The short-term story is that we need to genuinely, deeply form coalitions. We need to step away from non-alignment. We need to step away from strategic autonomy. There was a question on the chat, which is perfectly correct, which says, what can we offer 20 countries so that they might like to do deep engagement with us? I say, great question. And we need Gautam Bambawale and his colleagues who are representing Indian interests in these 20 countries to come back to India and talk about what are the concerns of those countries, what are the strategic objectives of those countries, and how can we in India reshape domestic policy in a way that makes those countries like us more, engage with us more, connect with us more, and have deep relationships between the people, have relationships in economics, in business, in education, in science, in culture, in movies, and so on. If we simply insist that we have strategic autonomy and we will never move one finger to address your concerns, then yeah, you have no engagement. And then the question of coalition formation doesn't arise. So we think that the next 25 years has to be the golden age of foreign policy in India. It has to be a world where some of the best people in India devote themselves and think about what does Sri Lanka care about, what does Bangladesh care about, what does Taiwan care about, what does Japan care about, what does Australia care about, and what can we in India do to reshape our domestic policies in a way that suits them. In the past, we've always done it upside down. There's some domestic lobby that becomes unhappy about some imports and we put an import barrier to that. There's a domestic lobby that has a view about the Indian behavior in Sri Lanka and we go change our Indian behavior in Sri Lanka. We've got to turn all this upside down. Foreign policy should drive domestic policy. That's the story of our short term, which is the next 25 years. And then there is the long-term problem. We in India have always wanted to be prosperous. Right at independence, Gandhiji and Nehru dreamed that in 50 years, India would be as great as the UK. We are not there. We desperately would like to become a successful, prosperous country. And now we have an even greater reason to do it. Mao Zedong said that power flows from the barrel of a gun and the gun flows from the barrel of the economy. Think of carrier groups prowling the Indian Ocean. It requires resourcing. It requires scientific and technological capability. It requires people in the country who know how to design aircraft carriers, who know how to buy aircraft carriers and modify them, who know how to operate aircraft carriers, who know how to build a tactical doctrine around aircraft carriers, who know how to operate a complex technological masterpiece of a modern defense force, where the bulk of the money does not go into salaries and pensions, but instead goes into equipment and training and information systems and research and the development of sophisticated intellectual capacity. We are not there today, and we need to do that. We need to become an advanced country, and that will require going to our foundations. We've got to ask, why did Indian private sector investment peak in 2011, and why has that declined ever since? We've got to go to the foundations of India's growth malaise. And in the paper, we basically offer 3 elements of the explanation. Problem 1, there is too much government interference in the freedom of private people. Only the creativity and the energy of private people makes a great country. A great country is not one in which the government dominates. A great country is not one in which the government tells us what to do. A great country is one in which the energy, the creativity, the chaos of individuals asserting themselves and pursuing their dreams and their imagination creates dynamism in the country. Element 2 is we've got to push back against the administrative state, the excessive concentration of power with officials, and the relative withering of the legislative and the judicial branch. And element 3, we've got to bring back the rule of law. We've got to fight for equal treatment of every citizen. It shouldn't be that if you're a friend of the regime, you get treated lightly, and if you're an enemy of the regime, you get enforcement actions. These are the 3 essential stories about how we lost our high growth in about 2011, and this is what we need to do to get back into the game. This is it for my brief comments. We'd love to answer your questions further.
Thank you very much, Ajay. Group Captain, should we get the other gentlemen?
Yes, we have got a number of questions in the YouTube. What I request you, maybe you can pick up 3-4 questions from the chat box. Then afterwards, I will read it out one by one because we already have about 1,700 viewers watching the program live, and we are getting the questions. I will pick them up and listed them out. Very interesting questions. After you say go ahead after 3 questions from the chat box, then I will read out these questions for you to take it forwards.
Sure. And when do you get the comments from Venki and others?
Yes, I think you can do it right away before we go to the chat box. I think that will be a good idea.
That's
Mr. Venki is there, and we also have Mr. Balraman. We can take their views, and Mr. Commander Watson already shared his questions both in chat box and other modes also. So over to you, Mr. Natarajan, for your conversation with Venki.
Sure. Venki, would you like to just make your views, because you're also an expert, you live there. What is your thought?
Yeah, thank you. Just 2 or 3 points. China, they used to believe that it's acceptable to have some skirmishes here and there, but also continue business as usual. They've done that with Taiwan, Vietnam, Japan, USA. So will this skirmish with India also just be a minor irritation? But I think with your best wisdom, you've come up with the right point that it is not. It is going to be much more serious and long-term. So therefore, we have to prepare. Number 2, is the conflict irreversible? That means, can ever a Gorbachev rise in China who can topple the regime? Can there be a regime change? Now, we do interact with a lot of people also down in our companies and the people there, that yes, they are open-minded and they are listening. They know what's happening. And so we will have to continue to engage with the people on the ground also through various channels, and we need to communicate our policy and our vision of the things. Number 3, I feel one of the reasons why they target places like Myanmar, Arunachal Pradesh, Nepal is also for the water. They are looking for water for the long term. It's going to be very important. And so we'll have to be more careful about these regions. Lastly, in your list of industries you've chosen, I would strongly make a pitch for adding garments made out of man-made fibers, because China has a huge monopoly there. If we tie up with partners from Taiwan and Korea and set up that ecosystem, it will take us 5 to 7 years, and we can gain a lot of business. We can gain a lot of jobs. And also, our clients are interested. Our clients are really looking at India as a serious partner for garment business, as long as we can shape up and provide them those solutions. Thank you, sir.
Oh, great point, sir. And I totally agree with you on the garments point, because even garments and even toys for that matter. If you go to places like Guangzhou, I mean, it's just completely flooded with that capability. And somebody was telling me that there are more Banarasi saris being made in Guangzhou than they are made in Banaras. So I hope that's not true, but I have no data to prove that. But you're right. So clearly, there are very easy and proximate opportunities which we should look at. No doubt about it. Gautam, any thoughts on what Pinky said in terms of?
Yes, I'll take up one point if I may, because I think, given the questions in the box and what Mr. Venki was saying, I'd like to clarify to all our listeners, viewers, participants that, what is happening and what started off in May 2020 in Eastern Ladakh is a different kettle of fish from the kind of small scale incidents which happened on the Ladakh border in 2013 and then again in 2014. In those instances, there were small numbers of troops, maybe, 20, 40, 100. But this time, the Chinese have moved several divisions of their troops to Eastern Ladakh. At one point of time, there were close to 50,000 troops on the Chinese side and close to 50,000 troops on our side, along with heavy armor, tanks, artillery, etc. Now, because China was the first mover in this instance, we have to keep in mind that what the Chinese have done is that they have violated many of the agreements which have been signed between India and China on maintaining peace and tranquility in the India-China border areas. There are many agreements. There's an agreement of 1993, there's a agreement of 96, 2005, and so on down the line. And the first paragraph of each of those agreements is that neither of the two sides will move large numbers of troops to the border areas. The Chinese have done this, they've abrogated, violated all the treaties. So you have to factor in that this is a different kettle of fish. And what the Chinese are signaling to India is two things. One is on the tactical side that they are going to move their ground positions to what they think in their mind is their territory, their boundary. And on the on the longer term side, on the strategic side, they're indicating, look, you are a much smaller power than India. Please understand your place in this pecking order in Asia and the world, and please know what your place in this brave new world is. And by taking up the military action that we have done, by taking up the geopolitical kind of action that we have undertaken, by undertaking the economic pushback that we have undertaken, including the apps, etc., and 5G is the latest in that, where we have kept out Chinese firms. India is saying we do not accept any of these propositions. We do not accept what China has done. And we have to keep this in mind that it is the Chinese who took this action and violated treaties with India in maintaining peace and tranquility. And therefore, India will react accordingly. We will have to reset India-China ties, which will include the economic sector, which will include geopolitics. Because if we don't do that, if, as Mr. Venki rightly pointed out, with other countries, they hope that the military action will be kept separate from the economics of the relationship. If we accept that, we are playing into the Chinese game plan. We are playing in according to the Chinese playbook, that military things will be separate and we will do what we want because we're more powerful, and the economics will continue as it is, which is that India will continue to suffer a $50 billion trade deficit with China. The answer to that is India has to say no. And because we have said no, the Chinese have been taken aback, taken by surprise. But in the longer term, of course, we have to correct our economy. And if there is one additional reason, we have to do it for our own sakes, we have to do it for ourselves. But there's one additional reason which is very pressing, which is that you have the Chinese dragon which has caught you by the tail. And if you want to get him off your tail, you better grow your economy in the next 20 years by the time India becomes 100 at 2047. I'll stop there.
That's a great metaphor, Gautam. Thanks. But would you just like to touch upon what the gentleman from Mandalay, Myanmar had asked? I mean, saying that, okay, we've talked about Quad, we've talked about BRICS, we've talked about India's partnerships with the US and Europe. But what is India's own perspective on the ASEAN? And of course, his more important question, which is for all of us, is that is there an innovative strategy to deal with Myanmar that India can lead, so that we say that look, we have a point of view on Myanmar.
Yeah, Ganesh, let me start with the Myanmar strategy, because that's a simpler question. The Myanmar strategy is something that we put into effect about 10 or 12 years ago, which is while calling for the return of democracy and rule of law in Myanmar, which we're doing even now, we will continue to deal with whatever government there is in Myanmar. So we do want to see the return of democracy in Myanmar, but we will also continue to work with whichever power is and whichever shape of that power is available in Yangon. That's the simpler part of it. As far as ASEAN is concerned, yes, India does accept ASEAN centrality. We do want to work with ASEAN. We will continue to work with them in our own ways. I don't think we have to keep talking about RCEP, because that is already water under the bridge. But India can build its own economic ties and economic and political relationships with ASEAN, and we are doing that even as we speak. So I'll stop there.
Mr. Balraman, your thoughts, sir? I mean, anything you'd like to share with us?
I have a slightly different view. I hope you guys will not pile on me and kick me. I think what happened in Galwan is the greatest thing to have happened to India. A piece of great good luck. Let me explain why. I have often been chagrined that we are such a fractured democracy. We do not have a unified point of view on anything. And whatever the government does, whoever the government is, okay, Congress or BJP or whomever, whatever the government does is wrong for a large number of people. So the problem for India is democracy is a luxury for the Indian. The point about argumentative Indian, we spend an enormous amount of energy discussing, disagreeing, arguing, with the result that we do not progress. Between the year 2000 to 2020, Deng Xiaoping was able to grow China so fast because there was unity of point of view in China. I mean, the populations were about the same. In the year 2000, both countries had about the same level of about 40% of the population below poverty line. In 2020, we still continue to have. The reason is that we do not have a unified point of view. Any external threat, all sociologists will tell you this. I heard this from a number of sociologists. Whenever there is an external threat, the nation unifies. So Pakistan has been an external threat for a long time. And at the most opportune time for the current prime minister, they hit at Pulwama and he won the elections by a landslide. And, this is how our external enemies are helping the Indian economy. Then China came into Galwan with so much seriousness, like Mr. Bambawale says, that we are all now alert. See, what India lacks is alertness. Even the second wave of COVID is hit us because we are not alert. We are so very complacent. We have internal issues. Why were we not alert? Because we are fighting elections. We are fighting each other on elections. What does it add to the GDP? I mean, see, democracy is a huge luxury. You see, without a substantial GDP, without the ability to defend ourselves, a democracy, to my mind, does not have a huge lot of meaning, if you ask me. Okay, I think it's a huge opportunity, and I'm not worried about China being militarily very strong. Shall I tell you why? The reason is that their main concern will be on the border. And why are we so careful about Pakistan? Because Pakistan has an atomic bomb. So why will China be very careful about India? India also has an atomic arsenal. So between two atomic powers, huge wars do not start that easily. Okay, they hesitate. So I'm not that worried about huge military threats and all. And actually, it's a threat for India is an opportunity. It unifies us. The very reason, sir, brilliant brains like yours is looking at this issue. And, I have been able to unify a lot of people. I run a women business forum for MMA. You know what my approach there is? I am saying there are 600 million Indian women, and they have someone earning the daily bread. Their risk is less for them to do a startup. I think in India, a startup is a very viable business opportunity. Large companies are not viable because of our bureaucracy. I mean, we spend so much time and energy managing the bureaucracy. Large companies find it very difficult. Startups, on the other hand, find it much easier. And hopefully, this government is liberalizing many things, including 15% income tax for newly started manufacturing industry and all this stuff. And there is so much, globally, credit has been eased. I think if we motivate women to get into startups, that would be an opportunity. So while everyone else is fighting and discussing, debating, disagreeing with everybody, I am trying to motivate women to do startups. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity. In India will, on the basis of an external threat of China, we will continue to do business with China. I totally agree with all of you. China is a reality. It's not going away. There is no way India can obliterate China, not even the United States. It cannot obliterate China. China is a reality. Now, will the Chinese leadership of Xi Jinping last forever? He is also a martyr. Okay, everybody is a martyr. There should be a regime change there in about 10 years' time. And I noticed recently that when the Chinese leadership mocked India, that we are burning so many bodies, there was so many objections within China. I mean, there are decent people within China who say, look, this is not in good taste. You cannot do this when Indian bodies are burning. So all Chinese are not bad. It is just that the leadership has a different view. They clearly want to be acknowledged as the global leader. Okay, we can say, fine, you are. What's our problem? I mean, as long as you don't enter my border, So I think it's a phenomenal opportunity. As all of you say, we should grow our economy. We should grow our armed forces. We should grow our technology, nuclear technology, and we should grow closer to all that all of you said is totally right. One of the problems for India has been, sir, India has been very arrogant in dealing with its smaller neighbors. I've seen it from the days of Rajiv Gandhi, G. Parthasarathi, and so on, whether it is Maldives or whether it is Sri Lanka, any neighbor, we tend to be arrogant. But because of what you very rightly said, we should look at our domestic policy. Is it helping Sri Lanka? Is it helping Bangladesh? India recognizes because of the Chinese threat that we need our neighbors. So in a lot of ways, the Chinese threat is a very, very good thing to have happened. I totally think that even COVID is a great thing to happen, because without COVID, we would not have had regular rains. Our carbon dioxide emissions would not have come down. So there is a good thing in every bad thing. Do you agree?
Thank you, sir. That was very interesting. Ajay, any thoughts on this? Anything you'd like?
Mr. Ganesh, before I think Mr. Pankaj Madan is also our head of counter shifting. They have done quite a bit of seminars, conclaves on China. Maybe with your permission, I may request him to quickly share his views before we move to.
No, certainly. No, I just want Ajay, any quick thoughts?
Mr. Ajay, after that, we can request Mr.
about the threat from China being a good thing.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I was hearing Mr. Venkataratnam with great interest. I'm very happy to have a debate with you about what memo we should give Jawaharlal Nehru and B.R. Ambedkar on the shape of the Constitution of India. Okay, it's a very interesting analytical and intellectual debate. And I'm very happy to debate that with you. However, that was a conversation for pre-1947. Okay, for better or for worse, the intellectual leadership of the Indian National Congress from about 1920 to about 1947 made some very important choices. Just at the time when Mao Zedong was building China into a harmonious one country, one language, one ethnicity, one viewpoint, no discussion, obedience. At that same time, we, the people of India, adopted the Constitution of India through a magnificent Constituent Assembly process. And we chose a path which is called democracy. We chose a path of debate, discussion, dispersion of power, freedom, civil liberties, and enshrining of the individual. Nobody is proposing that the Constitution of India should be changed. Nobody is proposing to take away the foundations of freedom in this country. In that case, we are at the place of learning how to make liberal democracy work. We are the argumentative Indian. We will disagree. We will have 20 languages. We will have 20 different ways of speaking, of living, of different lifestyles, of different cultures, of different cuisines. That's the glory of India. We are unity and diversity. We are where we are. We are not China. Mao Zedong was not Nehru. Now, our puzzle today is that short of a regime change where we do violence to the foundations of the Constitution of India and to the foundations of the liberal democracy, how do we deal with this situation? And that's what our paper does. So I feel there is a separate intellectual debate that do you want a little more harmony in India? Do you want everybody to be more obedient? Do you want one great leader to tell everybody in India what to do? Okay, I'm happy to have that intellectual debate with you, but that's entirely separate. That ship has sailed. It sailed pre-1947. The leadership of the freedom movement chose. Gandhiji and Nehru chose that our dream will be that we will become a liberal democracy like the UK. We will not become an obedient, harmonious country like China, where the great leader will choose something and 40 million people will die in a famine. So that would be my fundamental answer to the challenge of the harmony of how China works. Dissent, disagreement is the essence of India, and we should make it our strength. The greatest countries of the world are liberal democracies. Over and over in world history, it is liberal democracies who have triumphed. Liberal democracies will squabble, but in the end, they'll get it right. You go back to Athens and Persia, liberal democracies will get it right.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Ajay.
My point.
Pankaj, would you like to? No, sir. So, Mr. Balraman, I'll come back to you this time. We have a lot of questions. That's a problem. Pankaj, go ahead, sir.
Mr. Shah, I have to totally agree with you. That ship already sailed away a long time ago regarding this decision. But on the other hand, you know, the democracy is still the best system with all its flaws that we have. Like Mr. Winston Churchill said, and as also Mr. Winston Churchill said, that never waste a good disaster. That is where I agree with Mr. Balraman, but not with the challenge to the system of governance that we have. I totally am with Mr. Shaw there. But coming to China, gentlemen, not only India or the rest of the world is trying to reset their strategy with China, but so is China resetting its own strategy. It has its problems, of course, and they were already mentioned, like a demographic disaster approaching them. They're getting old very fast. And there's another thing that Mr. Ranade, perhaps you would remember that their debt to the GDP ratio really climbed during the COVID. The COVID pandemic's relief packages are costing the world a packet, but so does it's also costing in China too. The debt stands to more than 350% of the GDP. So as one of the economists that we recently invited said that Chinese are not 20 feet tall, and we Indians shouldn't also think that we are 4 feet short. That is my comment. Thank you.
That's a very good one. Ajit, you have any thoughts on that?
Actually, I'll just take, Ganesh, I'll take two questions which have come in the chat
Yeah,
box.
sure,
One is by Mr. Kalpit, who's with the ORF, he's the China specialist. He asks that I mentioned that so far growth and jobs were the source of legitimacy of the regime. And we are seeing a slowdown in job growth as well as economic growth and income growth. So what will now be the new source of legitimacy? So this is an open question, Kalpit, and you know that there's a new paper out which is actually, in fact, if not authored, led by President Xi Jinping himself on poverty alleviation. So China wants to be a zero poverty country. And there's I think you're aware of that. So, we'll study that, we have to understand that China is going to not stay static, as I think Mr. Pradhan also said. Only others, but China itself is grappling. In fact, they are undergoing a 5-way rebalancing of their economy, from dirty to clean, from export oriented to domestic, from industry to services, from sort of present to futuristic like AI and robotics. So they themselves are rebalancing. So Kalpit, that's where they are. The second question was, Ganesh, I think, I don't know if Mr. Vasan asked that, if they're aging, what will they do? I mean, the macroeconomics of aging is very, very discouraging because it slows down economic growth, increases saving and so on, decreases investment to GDP ratio. So I think what you want to see is, and they've already taken the lead, whether it's in 5G, electric vehicles, in robotics, the Chinese are ahead. So they're betting on futuristic technology, and you'll see probably much more. They'll also lead in automation. But these are challenges which they're going to grapple in their own way. We just have to acknowledge that they're not going to be static, but much of our work is domestic. Thank you.
That's great. Let me ask one quick question to Gautam. Gautam, Kalpit Mankikar from ORF. He's asking how much can we trust Russia as an ally, given that it is leaning towards China heavily in recent times?
Yeah, Kalpit, that's a good question. But as you know, that in international politics, in international relations, it's not a question of trust. It's a question of what are the interests, where do our interests intersect? And what we are saying is that there are several areas where our interests intersect with Russia. While Russia may be very close to China today and is getting closer, there's no doubt about it. I don't think the Russians like the kind of situation where they are a junior partner in this. But they have to accept a situation because of the fact that many countries in the West are putting sanctions on them, etc., etc. So I think India needs to play the smart game. India needs to play a game in which we can try to use the fault lines between Russia and China. And it's not a question of whether we trust them. It's a question of just where our where our interests intersect, and that we have to verify rather than trust, or we can trust but verify, as Ronald Reagan said. But I also see a large number of questions in the chat box, if you permit me, on the study of Chinese language, literature, etc. And I cannot but agree with what everyone is saying. You know your friends well, but you know your enemies even better. And therefore, it is absolutely essential for India to invest much more in studying the Chinese language, in studying Chinese culture, in studying the way the Chinese mind works and thinks. And we need to expand our study of China and Chinese culture, Chinese systems, etc. And we need to invest in this very quickly. So I totally agree with that point of view. And many people have been commenting on it. Thank you very much.
Just a point on what I think Dr. Sudipto, the professor at BIT, is asking. And I think, Dr. Sudipto, you're making a very important point. You said that, look, you have a lot of Chinese students in BIT and you think they're all very keen on understanding. And I think I completely agree. And I think somebody made the point earlier that, look, the battle, if I may call it that, is not against the Chinese people. I mean, I have some amazing friends in Shanghai, Hangzhou, even little places like Tianjin, for instance. They are really, really wonderful people. So, in fact, I still remember when last I was there, we went out for dinner with our Chinese country manager, a guy called Charles Song. And as usual, we were all talking about politics and how bad America is, how bad everything is. And when we talked about China, Charles would just smile. Okay, so I asked Charles at the end of it, saying, whenever we were kind of discussing China, you only smiled, whereas you were contributing when we spoke about America. And Charles said, look, Ganesh, one thing we learn in China is when people are talking about the Communist Party or the government, we don't say anything because we've seen so much prosperity over the last 2 decades that we like what our government is doing. I mean, we're not sure what you do, but I'm saying, and it's a very sensible point from a guy who's an MBA from the US and has come back. So I'm just saying, I don't think this battle is about people. I mean, I have some amazing friends in Lahore and Karachi as well. And sometimes when I post on Facebook, I get a lot of people saying, oh my God, you are friends with the enemy. The people are not the enemies. And I think that's the point, Sudipto, that you're making. And I completely agree with you. So that's really what we need to do. And totally what Gautam said. I mean, learning Mandarin is something that we should do, because if you cannot converse with whether you call them friend or enemy in their language, you're missing something. And I remember I have 2 very close friends who live in Shanghai. And one, I mean, the guy is from IIM Ahmedabad, 5 is from IIM Bangalore, who's my colleague. Both of them spent a year after they moved to Shanghai singing Chinese songs, because the only way you can learn the tonal language like Mandarin is by able to sing. So that is the level of commitment that they had. So I think the ability to understand what other people are doing, sometimes missing in us, because we tend to be very, in a sense, very insular when it comes about ourselves. So maybe there's something to be said for that. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Group Captain Vijay Kumar.
Yes.
I mean, why don't you?
Yes, we have a number of questions. Thank you, Mr. Ganesh. And what I'll do, I'll read out 2 questions which has come on the YouTube. Then after it's engaged and responded, we'll go for other questions. Meanwhile, you can pick up some of the important questions which has come from the chat box. The first question is from Mr. Ram from Bangalore. He wants to know, what are the forces shaping Chinese behavior? What is the best path for India in the short term and the long term? How can diplomacy and economic policy can work an intertwined fashion to the best of India's interests? This is one question from Mr. Ram. There's also a question from Mr. Dogara from Jammu. Mr. Dogara wants to know, India-China LAC clash will move to disengage. Political leadership ability to resolve conflict offers no guarantee on preventing future tragedy. What went wrong between Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping relations? What's your view on this?
Anybody would like to take that? Please feel free. Ajit, Ajay.
Ajay, will you take it or shall I take it?
No, Gautam, go ahead.
Yeah. Ajay, Ganesh, if you permit me, I'll just say a couple of sentences and then leave it for one of our co-authors, one of our colleagues to take it further. But, you know, for both questions, look, my response can only be that, look, this is not a question of, as Ganesh has been trying to point out, this is not a question of individuals. It's not what went wrong between Narendra Modi and it's a question of 2 nation states, 2 sovereign states, and what is happening between them right now, and what how we can shape up to this China challenge as we go ahead. So this goes far beyond individual incidents or individual personalities, etc. And therefore, I would say that, you know, please do read the paper and the book, which should be coming out in a few months from now. But this goes far beyond individual incidents, what's happening on the LAC right now, what is the relationship between Modi and Xi Jinping. This, you know, you have to analyze it much beyond this kind of level, at a level of how 2 neighboring civilizations, nation states, each with a history of 5,000 years, interacts with each other in the modern 21st century. And there it is the asymmetry between the 2 nations in terms of comprehensive power, which is dictating how China is behaving with India. And in order to change that behavior, we need to reduce that asymmetry, and which is what our paper is all about. I'm going to stop there.
Ajay Shah would like to add.
Yes, coming, Ganesh.
Yes.
So, you know, just to say, repeat what Gautam is saying, you know, it's a sovereign to sovereign thing. Of course, if it's people to people, if you're asking about people, Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that actually, if anything, we should increase our study of the Chinese history, Chinese culture, Chinese, systems. If anything, the people-to-people contact, I would say we are neighbors and we may be young countries, but ancient civilizations, all the more study is required. But what the paper is all about, the sovereign to sovereign. It's India as a sovereign. How does it face the challenge due to what the China, the sovereign, is doing?
So Ajit, on that point, there is a comment from my friend, Mr. Gautam Sen. So he says that, look, what bothers him is the idea of China considering politically that whatever is ours and whatever is yours is negotiable. Any thoughts on that?
No, this is, I think this is somebody else. So I don't know who said it. This is maybe during the time of Khrushchev and Kennedy, I think this is. But anyway, see, we cannot personalize. Personalizing the sovereign relations is always, this is the field of metaphors. That's not the way it goes. As I said in my preamble, and I'm sure my colleagues will agree, what happened in Doklam, what happened in Ladakh, Galwan, actually is something irreversibly changed. For the previous 50 years, it's not as if we have not had hostilities, but we have found a way to diffuse them, and we have found a way for a kind of a mechanism which escalates in a predefined order, where even the government gets involved. But something has changed, and something has drastically changed, I would say, even from 2013 to 17. When Mr. Xi Jinping became president, one of the first interviews he did was with a press delegation from India, and he identified 5 principles which would form the basis for future India-China relations. But almost on every one of those 5 principles, they have deviated massively. So I think something has changed, and that's what we need to acknowledge. And so that's why we need to change the way we have been dealing with China. That's the way.
Great, sir. Mr. Ganesh, maybe Mr. Ajay Shah would like to add, or shall I move on to another 2 questions before?
Why don't you move on to then we can get Ajay's view. Go ahead, Captain.
Okay, thank you. I'll have another question. This is from Mr. Ashok Kumar from Hyderabad. What he wants to know, if China were to create a permanent Indian Ocean squadron, its natural bases would be Gwadar and Djibouti. There is also a small island, Fio Fin Flu, I hope I spelled it correctly, in the Maldives, which China is developing as a resort. Planners will be concerned that it could act as a support base in some scenarios. So your views on this, please. And also there's a question from our co-panelist. He has just sent it to me. I'll read that also. The vote could be taken from Commodore Vasan. This question is particularly addressed to Ambassador Bambawale. On improving our neighborhood profile, the biggest constraint is the lack of deep pockets. It will need alternate funding options to wean away the smaller countries from the debt trap diplomacy of China. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
Ajay?
Yeah, Ajay, you go ahead. I'll come in after you're finished. No, Ajay, please go ahead.
Gautam, you should please do this.
No, I think I'll just try to answer those 2 questions, if I may, by saying that, when India is a $2.9 trillion economy, and when China is a $14.5 trillion economy, then anything that the Chinese do is looming large on our minds. And this is exactly what we have been arguing, that we need to take a much more macro approach, and we need to reduce the asymmetry between India and China. Say by the year 2047, when China is roughly a $85 trillion economy, and India, if it grows at 8% per annum, will be a $66 trillion economy, you will find that we will be thinking of how we can act and react to the Chinese in different ways. And this is the point we're making in the paper, that we need to think big, we need to get our act together, we need to reduce the asymmetry so that our reactions to individual actions, whether by China or whether by any other country, will be quite different. To talk about our neighbors, in the short term, yes, we should use some of our coalition partners, like say Japan, for example, to help us in doing projects in our neighboring countries. The Afro-Asian Growth Corridor is something in which India and Japan are working together in Africa, and where we are doing projects together. So in the short term, we can use that route, but in the longer term, we need to gird ourselves to, to expanding the Indian economy, to doing things right, so that many of these issues will then seem relatively minor and small compared to the point of time today where it seems that a 5 times our size economy is doing all kinds of things in our neighborhood. So I'll stop there and leave the floor to Dr. Shah.
No, I'm good. We should go on.
Ganesh, you want me to take 2 more questions from the YouTube before you go, or you would like to go, sir?
I thought Ajay was going to say something.
No, I'm good. We should just go on.
Yeah, go ahead, Captain.
Okay, sir. Here's a question from Satyamurthy from Pondicherry. He wants to know, India will take the place of China in global markets. But as India prepared its labor forces to challenge the Chinese skilled labor force, can India produce goods and commodities as cheap and as durable as they do by Chinese? There's also a question from Lata, an MBA student from Chennai. She wants to know, can India's fragile economy survive its own boycott China campaign?
Ajit?
Yeah, so the work is cut out for, first of all, please understand that there's a very big difference between Chinese demographics and Indian demographics. It's a stark difference. Both countries are a billion plus people, but China is already aging in the sense that its median age is much higher, I think 15 years more than India. Plus its labor force is shrinking. And that started happening about 3-4 years ago. Whereas India's labor force is going to increase roughly at 2% per year, maybe 1.9% for the next 20 or 30 years. There's a big difference. So we'll be adding something like maybe 200 million people in the next 20 years, I think, a little more. And China will be losing maybe 50, 60 million people in that period. That's the big difference. And getting our act together in terms of our competitiveness, global excellence, cost is our domestic agenda. We don't need to do it with reference to only China. We need to do it with reference to global markets. Can we be the global manufacturing hub for, let's say, the small car, the electric car, the future, the specialty chemicals, or the technical textiles, garments? Can we vastly increase our tourism industry, domestic? So these are the areas where can we substantially increase, for example, our training of paramedical staff, not just medical, not doctors, but nurses, because there is a whole world out there which is aging, not just China, but the Western countries, Scandinavia, even America. And there's going to be a global shortage of workers in the healthcare sector, especially in geriatric care. India can actually be providing skilled or semi-skilled workforce in this area. That's the work cut out for us. So it doesn't have to be with reference to China.
I'll just answer one question from Arvind Rajesh. He says that like we have back offices for the world because of English proficiency, and we also become back office for China. That is way too ambitious, my friend, because if you look at what, in fact, many Indian companies, including the very large one, Genpact, they set up offices in Dalian in China, and which is extremely well managed, not only to cater to Chinese customers, but also to Japanese customers. Don't forget that the Chinese ability to learn very fluent Japanese is probably better than India. So I think there are areas where probably we should not try to compete, because that might end up in a lot of investment and no real returns. So I think that's something. So I'm going to stop here, and a couple of other questions, Group Captain, we can answer, and then maybe we can.
Yeah, I think we got another 6-7 minutes. Maybe I'll take one last question afterwards. You can give a place for closing comments in your questions, sir. Here's a question from Mr. Clement from Mumbai. He says, what should be India's move to cut down its trade dependency on China? Are we in a position to take any drastic step towards severing our ties with, given China's strategic, political, and economic engagement at various places of the globe? What could be our policy direction? This is one question. There's also a question from Mr. Shankaran from New Delhi. What he wants to know is, fresh thinking in international relations is required at this critical juncture. Are we in India too wedded to the concept of non-alignment and strategic autonomy? Are we able to pragmatically reshape foreign policy in the way that are required to contain China? Your views, please.
Ajay, any thoughts?
In the paper, we emphasize that our prime objective should be to make India strong. That's not the same as trying to hit back at China by having restrictions against Chinese activity. That's a very important distinction. That you may be angry that they have grabbed land in Ladakh, but that doesn't mean that hitting back at China is necessarily wise. What if hitting back at China makes us weaker? We should be cold. We should think about what is in our interest. And a lot of the time, the most important Indian interest is more internationalization. The more we integrate into the world economy, the better it is for us, the stronger we become. And China is an absolutely integral part of the world economy, is an important part of the world economy. So simple-minded banning this and banning that is just not going to help us. That's a key argument we make in the paper. In the paper, we propose some very careful, thoughtful, limited aspects of blocking the role for China, because there are some places where they can directly hurt individuals, firms, organizations, assets in India. Other than that, this is not a time to do nationalism. We should not be retreating from deep engagement with the world.
Any closing thoughts, Gautam?
I would like to start with the comment which was made by one of our participants, a very, very perceptive comment. Obviously, he has had several years of experience dealing with China. He ended his remarks by saying that, please do not think the Chinese are 20 foot tall, and please do not think that Indians are only 4 feet tall. I think this is a very important contribution made by him. I think it is absolutely essential for all of us in India, you, me, and everyone else, every Indian, to have confidence, to have the Atma Vishwas, to realize that we can play this long game and that we can strengthen ourselves, our economy firstly, and then our military and other parts of our society, so that we can ensure that what happened in Eastern Ladakh in 2020 and continues to happen in 2021 doesn't happen again. Thank you.
Ajit? Oh, I think we lost Ajit. Okay, in any case. No, so let me just give you a couple of thoughts and then I'll close. I think Mr. Venkateshwaran has asked a very interesting question, saying, what role can the vast Indian diaspora play in building these relationships with the 20 strategic partners that we talked about? And that's a very good question, sir. And I think if you've seen the value of what's happening in the US, in fact, Kamala Harris is, I think, speaking next week, where many of us have been invited. It was mentioned today. And I think, it's really a reach out that is happening thanks to various initiatives in China. I mean, one is, of course, in the US, the Thai chapters, the Indiaspora group, and all these are really outstanding initiatives. So I think clearly there is a role. And don't forget that a lot of China was built by people who have been trained in the US, coming back to China and setting up their own facilities. My daughter runs a very successful cancer research lab in Sloan Kettering Hospital. And out of her 9 PhDs, top-notch scientists in that lab, 5 are Chinese origin. So it's amazing how many people have gone there and really doing extremely good work, and eventually they go back. So I think clearly there is something to learn from that point of view. And my last comment is, I think many of you may have attended the discussion with Sam Pitroda, which was held at the AIMA on Monday. And if you remember, somebody asked him a question saying that, look, what is the correlation between GDP and happiness? I think we get too carried away by Bhutan's gross domestic happiness. So Sam, in his usual style, said that, look, what are you talking about? He says, GDP is GDP and happiness is happiness. And he says, look, I'm sitting in Chicago and my wife watches some stupid Indian channels. And she says, all I see is people shouting at each other. This is happiness. I don't want to go back to India. So I'm saying, so we need to be very careful about that. And I think Mr. Balraman said that. When there's a threat, we really unite extremely well, which is fantastic. And I think what is required, if you hear everything that all of us said, is a united approach, mutual respect between government and citizens, between investors and investees, between states and societies and communities. And I think that's really what many of us, I'm sure, in this audience are hoping for and dreaming of. If we do that, I don't think the 4 feet, 20 feet will ever worry us, because we will go forward and be successful. So thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed the session, and I'm sure all of us did too. Ajit, any closing thoughts? Because you're dropped off.
Ganesh, sorry, my mic was my closing thought is that please read the paper. That's my.
Yeah, if you don't read the paper, which is only 10,000 words, we will force you to read the book, which is 60,000 words. But maybe you should read both.
We will share it with all the participants. We'll do that, and we'll also.
Please. Okay, sir. Back to you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thanks to all the distinguished panelists, Ganesh Natarajan, for choosing MMA to host this event. We are indeed privileged and honored. In fact, Gautam Bambawale and Ajay Shah, and also Ranade, Ajit Ranade. Thanks so much for sharing your insights. And also our partners for this event, Commodore Vasan, who will be delivering the formal vote of thanks. And Conda Understifting, Pankaj Madan, as usual, been a great support to us, bringing out some outstanding events. And Mr. Balraman, Venki Nagan, and Ravichandran Purushottam for joining us this evening. Thanks so much. As a token of our appreciation on behalf of President MMA, we would like to present to you, because the distance is what is separating us. What we do is we present all the masks go around and give it to the people, and also mini sanitizer we give it to the people, because we bring in the habit of the needy people to use the sanitizer and face mask. I think till the vaccine reaches everybody, I think this is the one way we should keep ourselves fit enough to take the China challenge, other than China challenge 2, we have to do that, is to keep ourselves safe and sound. Now I request our Commodore Vasan, he is the Director of Chennai Studies, to deliver the formal vote of thanks. Over to you, Mr. Vasan.
Thank you, Group Captain Vijay Kumar. It's a great pleasure for me to extend the formal vote of thanks. Not that this was necessary, because you already done that, but I would like to use this opportunity for just flagging a few issues. And first of all, I must thank Ambassador Bambawale, who has been part of C3S since its inception. When Mr. Rajan was there, and he's been instrumental in helping us out from the MEA to set this up. There are many questions on the Mandarin course, and should we not be reading more of this, etc. I'm very happy to share with you all that C3S has already conducted 3 such courses, and the 4th one is ongoing. And just before we all came in, I logged in a little early, and Group Captain Vijay Kumar was telling me that they are quite interested in having some more of these Mandarin courses, and we offered it, and we are going to do this. I must thank Ambassador Bambawale for sharing the paper with me, as soon as it was published, because it gave rise to phenomenal amount of discussion within the Chennai Center for China Studies group. We have former bureaucrats, we got IPS officers, we got Army, Navy, Air Force officers, the academia. And it, I think though the paper was about 24 pages, the amount of discussions that we had, which I'll of course share with the authors, because they'll find it very interesting, both for and against some of the views that were expressed in the paper, particularly about decoupling from China. Can we do it on our own once we move away from China? And if you have to do it, what more needs to be done? So, there were very interesting aspects which were there already as far as C3S was concerned when we discussed these issues threadbare. But I'm very happy to see that today, a very large number of audience, about 150 plus here, and another thousands of them who are, I believe, are on YouTube, who are looking at it, who are very actively engaged in discussions related to China. What comes out clearly is simple. We need to be able to face these hard options, and also acknowledge what was termed by Ambassador Bambawale as the asymmetry. We know what the asymmetry is. If you have an adversary who is 5 times your capacity, 5 times GDP, and obviously we need to grow, and which is where all these options that we have discussed here are going to be extremely important for us. Nobody is saying that sever all links with China. We are just saying that recalibrate the way you do business with China. So, and also convey the message that we are quite willing to go the long distance to keep away from you and engage with others. So I think many of these issues have been discussed. I do not want to take more time than what is allotted to me, except to thank all the participants here, starting off with Mr. Ganesh Natarajan, who has conducted this so well, Ambassador Bambawale, an old friend of C3S, and of course, Dr. Ajay Shah, Dr. Ajit Ranade, Pankaj Madan, of course, who we've been interacting with him for so long. Cass makes it a point whenever he comes to Chennai. Unfortunately, those visits have been denied now. Otherwise, we all used to have an excellent get-together with Pankaj whenever he came down to Chennai, in the suburbs of Chennai. So we do look forward to those visits again. And also for Venki and Mr. Balraman, who chipped in with their own first-hand experience, it's extremely important. It's pointless sitting in India, not having visited China, to have assumptions about China or start giving decisions on what we should do with China. So from that point of view, the first-hand inputs from people like Venki, Ganesh Natarajan, and others who've been there is of great importance to us. Overall, I would like to thank MMA, our partner, who considered it appropriate to involve both CAS and C3S in the discussions today. And I'm very happy to see the kind of participation that's there. The questions here, I know some of them have not been answered, but I'm sure MMA would have taken note of this and will send it to the panelists so that they can incorporate the responses in their own books or other publications, which I'm sure Pune International Center is going to do year after year, because they're doing very, very, very well now. And we would like to collaborate with them both as MMA, CAS, and C3S, so that we can increase our understanding of China. With this, I'd like to thank all of you for participation and thank Group Captain Vijay Kumar and Pankaj for giving C3S an opportunity to be part of this initiative. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thanks once again to distinguished panelists. We are really looking forward to hosting you when you visit to Chennai at our state-of-art management center. We'll be delighted to, I think this doesn't require just 1.5 hours, just not sufficient. We'll do a full day conclave. Pankaj, I think we should do that in a place where a lot of people come and share their insights, and which is really, really required today, sir. Maybe I think post-COVID, we should be able to do that maybe sometime next month.
We really look forward to that. Don't plan next month, plan it 6 months away, so then it will happen.
1 year away.
Yes, maybe before Christmas, we'll try and do that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thanks so much. Thanks each one of you. Stay safe and have a great weekend. Thanks to large number of viewers who watch this program. And if you have missed it, not to worry. It's all these recordings are available with you. I'll also share the chat box question to you, so that it can be a record for you and for your take it forward. I'll do that as soon as possible. And thanks all the viewers, as usual, for your great support, viewing in large number. I'm quite sure the large number of viewers will be watching next few days in our YouTube, and that is what is very encouraging for MMA to bring out some outstanding speakers to come and share their insight. Thank you. Stay safe, stay healthy, and till we meet again, bye-bye and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.